So I'm running a little behind in the project, and I'm going to combine my all my research and prototyping work into the same video and get caught up tonight. Um, so my project was to come up with a way to automatically count when my dog eats, so that we can kind of track her automatically and limit how much food she takes. And because we're trying to get her to lose some weight, she's a little bit overweight. So my idea was just to put some sort of little platform where when she steps up to eat, there's some switch, a button, a lever, or something that counts when that happens. And so I came up with the idea just to order this little device from Amazon. It's a little mechanical counting device with a lever on it. When the lever gets pressed down, it increments. While that was en route, one of the other ways I had thought about doing this was just simply putting a remote release to an iPhone camera underneath a platform that was spring-loaded. So I did a little bit of research around what that would take. I'm not going to go with that in the end for a couple of reasons, but I just want to show how that little experiment worked out. Okay, so you can see the setup: an iPhone set in camera mode, a remote shutter release. It's got a little piece of looks like foam rubber glued on the button. It's actually a polyethylene vinyl. It came from a device you buy in the store. It goes on a cabinet to keep it from developing a pinch point. I just cut out a little piece on a bandsaw and hot glued it on. And I ordered a box of springs from Amazon. So the notion is just simply this: how do I suspend this platform above this shutter release so that when my little doggy came along and stepped on the platform, she would trigger that shutter and take a picture like that. So it's actually a pretty simple concept. Just a matter of going through the box of springs and finding a set that made the most sense. A little bit of trial and error. Didn't take too long at all. Balance the platform on the springs. Size the height of the white button so that it just fits underneath the platform without triggering it. It took a little bit of stretching and compressing springs, trimming the piece of foam rubber, trying not to damage my shutter release when I was trimming that foam rubber on the belt sander. But it works. So the idea would be that when she comes along and she would smell food in her bowl, she would approach the platform, and we have trialed this. She does do it. She gets up on the platform. She doesn't like the instability of it, but she's getting used to it. And when she gets firmly on it, she gets enough weight. And while she's sitting there eating, you can see the shutter's depressed, and the camera's just blinking away over there. Nothing's happened until she gets off of it. And when she does, I've got a picture of her sitting on the platform, and it is date and time stamped. So the thought is, every time she gets up on this platform to eat, she triggers the shutter, takes a picture of herself each time. And so we would know not only how many times a day she's eating, but exactly what time of the day she's eating. So that concept worked. It doesn't actually solve my entire problem, because I also wanted to have a little bit of a mechanical part to this. This is not really that mechanical, other than the springs and something that I bought and a camera that I had, or a phone that I had. So let me show you the way we solved the problem, or the way I solved the problem of incorporating this instead of this. Okay, so this second concept doesn't involve springs. I can take all this and clear it out of the way, save the springs for another day, and the shutter release. And instead what I came up with was this concept. Now, this is a board on an axle, and the axle is positioned just to the right of the center of gravity of the board, so that when it's sitting like this, it pivots back. But it's balanced to the point where a little bit of force on the front part of it, and it goes down. So I had to figure out how to transfer that rotation, that motion, to this device. Move this back so you can see this device. So now I've got to figure out how to come up with a way to transfer the motion of that board to this mechanical device, and I've got a little lever on here that I need to press. So after a bit of trial and error, what I came up with was a board with an axle under it. The axle is positioned just to the right of the center of gravity here, so that when it's positioned like this, the back end of the board is down, the front end is up, but it's so balanced that it just takes a little bit of pressure to move it into that position. Okay, so then the issue was, how do you transfer this motion of the board in such a way that it pulls this lever? Now, I've already solved the problem, and I've got the concept sitting over here. That's the end result. I tried a couple different things. I just tried putting the counter underneath the board and have it come down and press the counter. But you can see that somehow I need to have it attached, and that rotational motion didn't translate well in that tight space. So then I thought about, well, stand it off a little bit, and this was the first linkage, which was sitting in this position. And you can see I moved around where the best attachment was, and I adjusted the shape and the angle, but in no case could I translate cleanly this rotational motion to this without it binding. So obviously I needed to do something to take up the motion in this arm and figure out how that linkage would work. This is the end result. So this is just two pieces of wire with loops on them, held together by a bolt with a couple spacer washers just to make the mechanism clean. And so the bolt allowed me to change the angle of attack on that arm and figure out the optimal spacing for that angle, the optimal angle and the spacing, so that when I connect it to the counter, it turns out that it is pretty much in this position like this. Tighten the bolt up. So now, when the dog gets on the platform and she triggers it, I've got to hold this down so it doesn't move. I transfer the motion and it clicks, and you can't see it from the camera, but it's incrementing one increment each time. So there it works. And what I like about this is that the spring mechanism in the counter forces the board back into the loaded position. So there's the all my experimentation, trial and error, a couple different concepts. I'm gonna go with one that's very simple. It has the caveat that I don't know when the dog steps on it. We've tested it with her. She doesn't really like the instability of the platform. When it goes down, she'll stay here and she'll eat. Sometimes she'll back up, reset the counter, go forward again, do a click, and then back up off the counter. So there's an imperfection in the concept, and I don't really have an immediate solution to that. I'm just, at this point, just trying to translate this mechanical motion and increment each time, and that's working. Okay. That's it. Now the other thing I need to do, and I may just build this into the, as I build this out into the final build, I may start incrementing additions to the design and do the other thing I wanted to do. And part of the reason to do this is just to kind of transfer the fun of doing this kind of a project and have other people get some enjoyment out of it. I mean, I've already kind of achieved that because my wife and daughter think this is really funny that I'm doing this with our little dog. But I was going to add to it that when she steps on this thing and it trips the counter, that it also trips a mechanism that lowers a pair of sunglasses onto her rear end, so that it's sitting right here and the camera takes a picture of her from that angle, and you get that famous photograph of the rear end of a dog with sunglasses on it, and I thought that would be funny. Now that's a little bit more complicated mechanism. It's going to involve some pulleys and a counterweight. I've kind of worked that out on paper. I know how it works, and I may just increment that into the design as we go forward. Maybe the easiest way to do that later on is with some sort of stepper motor system where I can count the number of revolutions and the width of a pulley. I get the right elevation and positioning for where it's going to fall in her rear end. That'll be a lot easier to do it that way than figure it out mechanically. But nonetheless, I may just try to do it mechanically also for the fun of it. And I've worked out on paper, and I think I know what it looks like. The challenge is going to be I don't get a lot of range of motion in the board when it goes into this down position. It's only traveling about an inch. I'm going to have to translate that 1 inch of motion into about 3 or 4 inches of motion up here at this position. Can be done, just lever arms and measurement and angles. We'll see how that goes. Now, there's an important design element in the mechanism that had to be worked out. And without everything being bolted down, I'm just going to demonstrate that. The importance to that pivot point and the fact that it's got some motion in it can be seen just by me demonstrating it. So it's clicking, and it may be very subtle, but the fact that there's an axle that allows this bottom arm right here to move is what enables the mechanism to operate smoothly without binding. There's just a slightest motion in it, maybe a couple millimeters. That's enough to make it work and not get stuck. And I didn't figure that out right out the gate. I had this angle at several different positions, and I had the length of it at several different positions, and I'm not demonstrating all of that. I'm going to spare you those several hours, but it came down to that mechanism, that length, and that angle, and it works perfect. Could have worked it out in a computer modeling program probably in a couple seconds, a little bit faster than I did it this way, but this was interesting. And just to demonstrate the other part of the concept that we may work in later when she's eating, it would be really funny to have a little counterweight pulley system to just lower a pair of sunglasses onto her rear end and have the camera take the picture of her in this view. This is proof that she's eating at this time and at this date. Might take a little finesse to get the camera to trigger at the same moment those glasses are in place. We'll see how that goes.